right, so let's finish up with Print the Legend.
Yes.
Print the Legend was a film that I was really excited about seeing because I know a lot of people in the maker community, and so Print the Legend is a film about 3D printing. And I thought it was going to be entirely about the maker community and how this movement has started and all that stuff. And it was a little bit about that. But what it was really about was sort of the corporate wranglings of the companies that build these 3D printers. So there's a couple of them. There's MakerBot, which is sort of the big one.
Right.
But then there's also, the big one, but it's the big smaller one.
Right, exactly.
There's 2 that are actually like industrial 3D printing that have been around for 20, 30 years, and MakerBot's only been around for like 5 or 6 years.
Right.
And perhaps for those people that are not 100% on what 3D printing is,
that's a good point.
Maybe get to that.
So 3D printing is the idea that rather than, if you've got a block of wood and you can chisel out like an object, you can actually tell a computer, build this object, and it can build, at this point, pretty simple objects, like single pieces of plastic, essentially, like a chess piece.
Right.
Yeah.
Or,
a holiday ornament or something.
Yeah.
Well, and of course,
stuff like that.
and as elaborate as things get, the more cost there is with that.
And I think the main aspect of 3D technology that's focused on here is bringing that technology, which has typically been for the big giant companies, almost down to the personal level, whether it's a person's home or small business. And I think it likens a lot to the PC wars of the 70s and 80s, where we had Apple and Microsoft who were battling IBM to bring computers onto everyone's desk. There's definitely a lot of parallels between that story, I would say.
Yeah.
Immediately when I hear of 3D printing and sort of the way it's going, it makes me think of all the things in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Like I can walk up to this device, I say I want a hamburger, and it builds me a hamburger.
You want your replicator,
right.
basically what you're
That's
saying.
kind of what
you want your tea Earl Grey hot. I'm with you.
Yeah, that's what it feels like it could potentially lead to.
Yeah, and I think that's essentially where this can go. Right now, it's essentially plastic. These devices can build stuff out of plastic. Right. And they do a great job of printing out of plastic. But the idea is that I can model something in 3D on my computer, and I can, instead of sending it to like a inkjet, I say print this 3D model, and it will print it out.
Yeah, actually, I had another trip that I did sort of right after South by, where I was listening to NPR, and they were talking about this girl who I think she lost her hand or maybe some fingers, and the family, as the girl was growing, is able to sort of print these hands
that
for
is featured in this film.
Is it? Okay.
That is a piece of this.
I wasn't sure. Yeah, and it was just, they were, obviously saying like, oh, we can do this for like $5, and it's just like, what? Like, how are you able to do that? And of course, as she grows, then all they do is scale it up and then print another one. It's just, that stuff like that is obviously here now, which is pretty amazing. I wasn't sure if that was in the film or not.
Yeah. So there's 2 companies that it's really focusing on: MakerBot and Form. Is it Form Lab or Form Industries?
Form Labs.
Form Labs.
Yeah.
And so they actually make they use different technologies.
Right.
So MakerBot has like this sort of extrusion technology where it's like it's got a little gun and it sort of, prints out an object like that. And Form Industries actually has this, what's it called? It's like liquid... a stereolithography.
Right, which basically, and they've just taken that technology has been around for several years. Again, I'm going to call it the IBM of the film, already has this. What Formlabs does is, again, sort of make it much smaller and much more personal.
And they're selling these 3D printers for like low 4 figures, like 2,000 to 3,000.
3,000, right.
So not something you would just any day of the week just, all right, I'll buy one of those. But something that if you thought about it and saved up for it, most people employed in this country could probably...
Or a small business might see a lot of
business.
value in it if they had a particular object they wanted to mass produce.
Yeah. So it covers sort of the history of MakerBot initially. And what's really interesting is the journey that they take us on of MakerBot. Because MakerBot starts out as sort of like this open source, like everybody can have this technology, and they like even... go to as far as like releasing their blueprints,
prototypes and things like that. Yeah,
so you could,
schematics.
if you had the knowledge and technical knowledge, you could actually build one of these yourself.
Right.
With their
They're trying to build a community.
Yeah. And then that changes.
Right.
And what it turns into is sort of like this corporate melodrama where it's like the guy that they picked as this. It's almost like an Apple. It's almost like a story of Apple where it's like you pick this guy as your CEO and you expect him to stand for the things that you stand for and you want him to, lead the charge for the things you want. And then he becomes a CEO.
Right. And he's half performer, half businessman.
Exactly. Right. And the guy's name is Brie Pettis.
Right.
Or is it Pettis?
Pettis.
Brie Pettis. And he comes across as a very sort of not as he comes off as like he's wearing a mask.
Yes,
the
all
whole
the time.
movie.
Right.
So he's like this face he shows everyone is like, hey, I'm Brie Pettis and I'm gonna make cool 3D stuff and it's gonna be awesome and you can join us and it'll be great. But then you hear about the stuff that's happening from the people he fired, and it's so bizarre because like you're watching this movie. And you're hearing interviews from all these people as they went through this. I'm sure they shot for several years.
Yes.
Interviews with every individual person.
Right.
And then at the end of the movie, they're like, and all these people are fired.
Well, to that end, I say I agree. Well, to sort of taking a step back, when I went into this film, I kind of like you thought this was going to be an education as to the technology of 3D printing. I knew this existed. I had heard about it in headlines, and they did a good job of covering the things that I think have gotten sensationalized.
Sure.
They even go into the idea of 3D printing a gun, which has a very interesting angle in the film. But what I loved about this Andy, was that I went in thinking it was going to be a film about that. What I walked away from was a film about the modern state of entrepreneurship and what it does to individuals. Sure, this is a film about 3D printing, but that's really just a vehicle that I think this story could be told almost in any industry about these little people in these garages who are intimidated by the big souls, but do have that passion, do have the ingenuity, and try their hardest to succeed. And then what happens when you do actually succeed? Some of my favorite parts of this film are when they try to raise money. They have Kickstarter campaigns, or fundraising campaigns, and then they have these great celebrations with the champagne flowing and everything's going to be great for the rest of our lives. And the next day, oh my gosh, we have work to do. And oh my gosh, how can we possibly fulfill these goals? And I liked seeing what I thought was a very candid, honest representation of the physical, mental, and emotional toll that entrepreneurial success brings to people. And I liked seeing the journey. I agree. It wasn't quite what I expected, but I like that from my documentaries. I like walking out of it feeling that I was educated about a subject that I didn't go in expecting to learn more about. Kind of like you were saying, Ukraine is not a brothel. And so I thought they did a very good job of following these characters over several years, and you got to see a radical transformation.
Absolutely.
It wasn't like you were seeing old footage. You actually had Brie Pettis saying, I stand for X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And 45 minutes later, Brie Pettis saying, well, X, Y, and Z. I mean, if you're in business, it's not, that was so 6 months ago.
It's about the dangers of success,
right,
and it's about the dangers of accepting
I agree.
investors.
Right.
Because you see these Kickstarters all the time where it's like they have these big ideas and they're going to rule the world, and then all of a sudden they they get like 10 times their budget, and all of a sudden they were ready to make 100 widgets. Now they've got to make 100,000.
Exactly.
And it's like they don't know anything about how to make 100,000.
Yeah, and that is the danger, obviously, of being on the other side of those Kickstarters. I think that's interesting to hear that, because a lot of times I'm always on Kickstarter, and I'm mostly looking at games, video games, and I'm like, well, they have $350,000 and they only needed 10. So
this better be the best game ever.
Yeah, so it's like there's a pretty good chance that I'll be able to catch this a little bit later down the road,
Right.
So then I kind of back off and then sort of find something else that's a little bit smaller. But then, of course, you're like, oh, there's 2 days to go. They're only at 60% of their thing.
Maybe they're awful.
Yeah, it's like,
Right. Why isn't anyone else supporting
do I
them?
put
It's
money
really
into
an
this? And
interesting
then there's always that stipulation that you might throw $30 at them, but you may never see anything because of that. That is always interesting. And it seems like, with 3D printing, it's almost like a double-edged sword because, if someone's trying to sort of publish, or make these machines, but then there's also a sort of secondary market because then once you make the machine, you can make whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're almost trying to provide a product that makes other products. And so that's a weird layer of, that complicates things.
Yeah, I mean, it covers all the aspects of the startup. Essentially,
Right.
It covers outside investing. It covers patent trolling, which it deals with as well.
Yep.
And I thought I thought it was interesting. They spent a lot of time. The 3D printing gun guy was almost like the third pillar of this film.
Yes,
so
which was a very interesting aspect, the idea of someone who is willing to take anything and find a twisted use for it.
Yeah.
And I thought the film did a fairly good job of not presenting him too much like a villain, but more of an antagonist, not necessarily good or bad, depending on your viewpoints of what he stood for. But I like that he definitely served as an obstacle in the eyes of some of the other characters.
Well, and what I found really interesting about that is I didn't agree with any of his positions, but I thought he was really – it's like he's an important part of the conversation.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to put that in front before it blows up, and then someone is shocked by the fact that someone built like a nuclear bomb out of a 3D printer.
It's not going to happen in secret.
Yeah,
nobody's going to be surprised if somebody 3D prints a gun and shoots somebody.
Right, I agree, and I think, and I like that they had all these different kinds of characters. I would like to note that this did win a prize. It won a special jury prize for storytelling, which I thought was very apropos. This is a really good, to me, I found a really good story with a backdrop of becoming more educated about technology that I honestly didn't know a lot about. Now, I don't know how people who are very familiar with the technology will feel about this, as they think it's a little pedestrian and a little bit simplistic given all the intricate natures of this industry as it's booming. But as an outsider, someone who's just mildly interested, I was captivated by these characters and was ready to follow, was really curious to see where these people were going to end up. So for that reason, I give the documentaries a huge amount of credit. It's very sharp, very good camera work, very interesting graphics, made something that I thought was kind of intricate, very easy for me to understand and digest.
Yeah, and I think it's the perfect film for South by Southwest, especially running during the interactive part of the festival.
I agree.
Because there's, it's very famous examples. Twitter was birthed at South by Southwest. It was nothing before South by, and then all of a sudden everyone used it at South by Southwest, and now it's huge. Foursquare was the same way. All these startups come to South by Southwest. It's very much like it is for bands. They come there to blow up. Well, here's what's going to happen. Here's your next 5 years if you blow up.
Absolutely.
And weren't they printing Oreos at South by?
They're printing candy. Somebody, Deloitte or somebody was printing.
I could swear that there was like
little
a
candy things.
Yeah, I could swear that Oreo was there printing things out of Oreo cookies.
I have no idea.
There was
delicious.
It was like on the corner over by the convention center, and I kept seeing people tweet about it, but then it was like, oh, it's broken. Oh, now it's back on. Just kind of like
run over in the next 5 seconds.
Yeah, I don't know if this is worth my time to go observe, but that's another thing. With big businesses. I mean, I'm learning now that there's a German car maker that can make cars out of a 3D printer now. They can, we came up with this body and we printed it, and well, there it is right over there. You can drive it if you want it. That's that's crazy. And of course, you see, you sort of see things like this, which, like the motorcycle shows, like they're building motorcycles from scratch. I know that's not quite a 3D printer, but that's kind of the grandfather of that technology. We're like, okay, we have a computer that's going to cut this exact thing out. We designed it in a computer.
Very similar.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see sort of the business growing in a more small business, inside your own home kind of thing.
You don't have the large manufacturings anymore. Now you can you literally can build it at home.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.